This week, I'm doing a different type of episode. I'm sharing a keynote I did a few weeks ago about how you can use design thinking and artificial intelligence to reclaim your time. The acceleration we've seen with artificial intelligence, with tools like ChatGPT and many others, has made design thinking even more relevant and accessible than ever before. In the show notes, you'll find a link to an article where I share how I use ChatGPT to turn a traditional assignment into a design thinking experience. We go many steps further, from creating directions to creating a lesson plan that we can share with others, to sending emails to leadership and parents to explain how we're using design thinking to enhance literacy. We even have it put together a conference proposal, and honestly, we could have kept going and going, using it as our ultimate thought partner and assistant. And that's the mindset I want you to have in today's episode. I want you to think about the things that you could do if you could outsource things that are taking up a lot of your time to an assistant, or what you would be able to do if you had a thought partner to collaborate with. Because that's how we should be thinking of AI, as our partner, allowing us to accelerate the things we've always wished we could do.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin, and how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Sabba Quidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here amongst so many friends and colleagues. And I really am excited to talk to you today about the future of learning. And while so many of us I know are here to think about what is best for our learners and what can we take back for our learners, I want this first hour to be about you. Because the best thing you can do for your learners is take the best version, the happiest version, the most joyful version of yourself back to them and to your classes. So I want to start today by sharing one of the questions that has been something that is just top of my mind ever since I first heard it. And that was from the book Atomic Habits. One of the most profound things he shares in the book is that so often we are focused on outcomes. And the book isn't about school, but when you read it, there's so many parallels to what we experience in school. And so the book talks about how we're always focused on outcomes, where what we really should be focused on is who do we want to be? And so that's what I'd like to start us off with today, is just beginning to really think about, if somebody was to ask you when thinking about your role, who do you want to be? If somebody was to describe you, what would you want them to say about you? What would some of those words be?
I love hearing how people say they want to be someone who is motivational, someone who's a safe space for others, a coach, a supportive person. It's a reminder to everyone in the room that they all entered the field of education to make an impact, not to be the deliverer of a standardized curriculum. They are here because they believe in the power and rapport of relationships. I love opening talks with a question. It allows everyone to have a more personalized experience because they can connect how they're thinking and feeling, their own context, to the ideas that they're going to be hearing. I also design questions throughout the session that allow people to build on their thinking with the ideas they're hearing. In the next segment, you'll also notice that in my talks, I don't share my entire story up front. My work and research with design thinking over the past decade is deeply intertwined with my own personal story. And so I rather reveal parts about myself throughout the talk instead of sort of that introductory bio all up front.
We all came into this profession. We all do what we do because we have a vision of who we want to be. And so often, sometimes that cloud of bureaucracy, the different things that we face day in and day out, can really blur out for ourselves what that vision is. And so hopefully today is a little bit of a reminder and a little bit of a reigniting of some of those thoughts and feelings with some strategies for you to be able to take back with you to actually keep those things alive. So as Andrea mentioned, I was a history teacher. So I'm going to take you on a little history lesson, just take you a little bit back into the past. And I want to take you back to the year 2007. In the book, Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman, He calls the year 2007 an inflection point. And I can't believe how long ago 2007 was, but anyone want to take a quick guess as to why he called 2007 an inflection point? iPhone, yeah, which coincidentally is in my hand. But yeah, it was the launch of the iPhone. But it wasn't just the iPhone that was launched that year. That year, we saw so many emerging technologies come to play that today, honestly, we probably couldn't even imagine our lives without. I know for me, one of the most significant ones on there is like Airbnb, right? Even if you look at some of the social media platforms that were emerging, things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, 3G, which is such old technology now, but all of those things were emerging at that time. Yet just a few months later, we would enter a recession. And so what's always been so fascinating to me as I look back on that time now is while some people were creating new products and services and building these new companies and businesses and thriving financially, socially, from a purpose perspective, other people were struggling to adapt to a world that had completely shifted because of technology. 2007 was also a really significant year for me. And one of the things that I reflect on often when I think back to that period, which is a lot of similarities to kind of what we're seeing and experiencing today, is this quote by author William Gibson, where he says, "The future is here. It just isn't evenly distributed." And I can't think of any group in a more powerful position to be able to shift that trajectory than educators. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today is how do we begin to do some of those things? So like I mentioned, 2007 was also a very significant year for me because it was the year that I graduated as a, first year high school history teacher. And, I kind of did all the things that everybody told me to do, go to school, get the good grades, blah, blah, blah. Graduated and thought like I had made it. And I even did my master's, right? Like UCI, I had a great joint credential program with the master's, did it all. Got my first job, which was absolutely incredible right here in Irvine, California. What made it so incredible was a history and English collaboration. I mean, it was great. And I was like, wow, it worked. I did it. I'm here. I'm happy. These are all those aspirational things that I want to be, that I'm going to do. Yet for the next 4 years, I was pretty much treated like I was just another number. And it was layoff after layoff after layoff. And 2010 was a really pivotal year because it was the year that I almost made the transition into a completely different career. I had started researching HR professions because I was like, I am done with education. I am leaving. This is ridiculous. Nobody values me. I'm putting in all this effort. I'm doing all this stuff. Nobody values what I'm bringing to the table. I'm going to leave. And thank God I didn't, because that year I also read for the very first time the book Linchpin by Seth Godin. And I wish I could remember how I came across this book, but I don't. But it absolutely shifted not only everything I thought about the world of work, but also shifted the opportunities and possibilities for me as an individual in my field that I was excited to be a part of. And the one line that really, really resonated with me from the book was this: what makes you indispensable? One of the things he talks about in the book is how in today's world of work, it's not enough to just show up, go to school, get good grades, get a job, and think that you're going to be okay and have stability in your life. The only thing that can keep you relevant is having a strong understanding of what makes you unique. What are your skills? What are your strengths? How do you showcase those? And how do you articulate that value to others? And these are all questions that now, when I think back, I should have really spent my years in school being able to explore. What are my skills? What are my strengths? What makes me unique? How are you as a school, as an educator, helping me showcase those? Not things that I should have been answering midway through my career after having graduated.
In 2012, I was reading Seth Godin. In 2022, just a decade later, I was interviewing him for the documentary I released last year and my podcast. It's truly a testament to the world that we live in today, and that how when we share our ideas and our work, we build relationships that create opportunities. I'm a strong advocate for LinkedIn because it's both a portfolio and a network. I know many people who have students build Google sites and many others. However, driving traffic to your website is no easy task. With LinkedIn, you can both showcase your work as a portfolio and have access to people and jobs. After all, LinkedIn is where the world of work lives. I launched a course last year that any school can integrate for their students called Design Your Future, where I teach them how to be curious and confident about what's next after high school through showcasing their work and building a network with LinkedIn. The most popular request was to create a similar experience for adults, and I'm excited to share that I'll be releasing that in March. You can find the link in both in the show notes. As you'll hear next, social media and the people I met truly shifted the trajectory of where my career as an educator was about to go.
From 2012 to 2014 was really where I began to then really see a shift, but it was all because I had started with, what am I good at and how can I contribute in that way? And one of the things that I was good at was merging history and literacy. And so technology played a really, really significant role in allowing me to amplify a lot of that work. However, a lot of us come to these conferences, we find these technologies that we're really excited about. And when I was, director of innovative learning at these schools, I used to do the same thing. I would go back and I would be like, oh my God, I learned about this tool and you need to learn it too. And here's why everybody should be using this and all those kinds of things that we often do, or that maybe you've been on the receiving end of as well. But one of the things I'm going to talk about today is the importance of learning from failure. And that was a huge failure in my end as a leader, to think that we should start with the technology, right? Because so often we look at technology, we look at new things that are coming about, and we think, okay, here's a new tech, what do I do with it? Here's a new device, what do I do with it? When in reality, what we should really be asking is, what can this do for me? And that was an idea that I heard from the second really influential person in my career, and that was Eric Brynjolfsson. He's a former MIT, now at Stanford, digital economist, who has a really, really phenomenal book that probably would be more relevant now than any other book, called The Second Machine Age, which is all about artificial intelligence. But at his core, even though he's an economist, Eric talks about how he's an educator and the role and value of education and why it is that we need to focus on it. He talks specifically a lot about educators as wealth creators. It's just a really, really phenomenal book. But this one line shook me to my core.
The last line from the book, The Second Machine Age, says technology is not destiny, we shape our destiny. I immediately wondered, how might we shape our destiny? Eric Brynjolfsson is yet another famous author and economist who went from being on my bookshelf to being on my podcast and being my mentor as I was doing my research on using design thinking to prepare people for the second machine age. If you haven't heard my episode with him where he talks about how to reinvent education in a world with AI and other technologies, it's a must listen, and again, it's there for you in the show notes. This week's episode is truly packed in the show notes with so many resources that you will find practical and accessible and will really help accelerate how you're thinking about a lot of the emerging trends that we're seeing right now. Next in my talk, I transition into how I believe one answer to how we shape our destiny is using design thinking. To start, I pause and have the audience start thinking about the next 1 to 2 months. And I ask them to write down and share one challenge they are facing or an opportunity that they are curious about exploring. The answers range from making more time for myself to trying a new tool to the classic systemic challenges that people are always wanting to solve for, like the grading system.
And that is such a classic example. I love that. Like, how many other people in here are like, let's please change the grading system and how we grade and give feedback and everything. Yeah, it's such a top priority for so many people. And yet so often when we are in those scenarios and we are thinking about really big systemic changes like that, we almost stop before we even start. And I love that example because to me, it's like a really classic example of like how design thinking can help you. Because so often when we think about those really big systemic challenges that we would like to shift and transform the practice in, we feel like we can't. And we feel like we can't because we're trying to create the end, the full solution, instead of just thinking about, well, what does step one of that process look like? And it's one of the reasons why I think design thinking is such a powerful and helpful framework, which brings me to my third really pivotal transformational moment in my career, which really was through learning from my own peers at yet another local Q conference. So this time it was San Diego Q, because I used to travel to all of them. because they were amazing, was San Diego Q, and it was two first grade teachers. And at that time, I was working in higher education. I was the director of innovative learning at the University of Southern California. So you might think like, well, higher education, like first grade, like how are you guys going to like learn and collaborate? You absolutely can. And listening to these two first grade teachers talk about design thinking completely, again, brought so many different things full circle for me when I was thinking about Seth Godin, like what makes you unique and what are your strengths? When I thought about Eric Brynjolfsson, like how do you shape your destiny? To me, these two first grade teachers had that answer. And one of the things that they talked about during their session, this was back in like 2014, was how do we use design thinking to prepare people with the skills and mindsets to thrive in today's world of work. And it just, like I said, completely shifted so much of what I did. But if you haven't heard of design thinking before, let me give you a really quick, simple overview. This is how you're probably going to see design thinking most of the time in its most traditional form, is sort of these 5 stages. But the one thing that makes this process so unique that you will often see people change and should always be a red flag for you is they change the empathy piece. But what makes the design thinking process so unique is that it begins with empathy. And while people might want to change that to learn, to observe, or to anything else, there really is no replacement for the word empathy. And empathy is what allows us to ultimately shape our destiny because it begins with us. What challenges do you face? What frustrations do you have? But on the flip side, what motivates you? What are you excited to do? And when you can bring in those conversations and you can start conversations from that place, it becomes so much easier to bring people on whatever journey of transformation it is that you're looking to do because you're actually solving real problems. Whereas so often we come to the table with the problem and solution hand in hand.
Towards the end of this keynote, I share a real-life example of how to take a standard and turn it into a design thinking experience. Prior to ChatGPT, this would take people a while to learn and apply. Now, you might think, well, if you can do this using ChatGPT, then I'm out of a business and no one really needs design thinking workshops anymore. And it is so to the contrary. AI won't replace humans, but humans who know how to leverage AI to accelerate their work and help people progress faster towards solving things that they previously thought they would never have time for will be who ultimately replaces you. ChatGPT has allowed me to increase how quickly I can teach you how to use design thinking. It opens up more time for you to focus on application in your context and even quicker implementation. And the best part? So many parts of the process are done for you so you can focus on what you do best, personalizing the learning experience for those you're working with and being attentive to them, because ultimately that's something that AI really can't do. It can't just pivot in the moment based on what it's seeing because it needs that prompt, it needs that data. But you as the human now have the just mental capacity to be able to really engage with the people around you, really engage in that empathy and identify their needs and how to pivot in the moment, which is ultimately what educators do best.
Which brings me to the second part of why I love the design thinking process. Design thinking is not just a method or a series of steps. Design thinking is both a method and a mindset. And we talk so often about these skills, right? Things like learning from failure, creative confidence, having optimism grounded in reality, making and iterating and trying new things. These are all things that come about from this process. And I want to share with you the very first lesson that I learned from these two first grade teachers. Because what really struck me about design thinking when I first learned about it was the simplicity in reframing. Too often when we think about change, no matter what change it is, we feel like we have to uproot everything and start from scratch. What I found so beautiful about this process was that by changing the language, they were able to change the experience. And so this is a really simple activity. I mean, who hasn't read a storybook to somebody, right? And so this is a very typical kind of like storybook. It's called Catch That Rat. And it's all about the story where this rat is running through town, wreaking havoc. Mom's afraid of the rat. Grandma's afraid of the rat. The mailman's afraid of the rat. Like they're a very typical kid story. And whereas most of the time you would just read somebody a story, they completely reframed it by creating more active experience. So when they applied the design thinking process, it was, okay, let's do the empathy phase. When you're reading the book, we really want you to think about the characters and identify ultimately with one. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they hearing? What are they seeing? Right? Define the problem. What is that one problem that you see in the book that you think you can solve? Right? A little bit of creativity there because kids will come up with all kinds of things. Okay, great. So you've come up with a problem. Now let's ideate. What are some different ways you can solve for this problem? And then ultimately, we're going to have you create one solution and then share it out. So one of my favorite examples was one of the students that chose the rat as their character. And as they're doing this empathy work, they're like, the rat is just hungry. It just is going around because it's not trying to scare anybody and this and that. And so they ended up taking the paper towel roll. They had those maker materials and whatnot. So they end up taking this paper towel roll. They can make a little machine where the rat goes in and comes out a human and the human goes in the other end and comes out a rat. So that they can ultimately both experience what it's like and they can feel the story together. But that's the beauty. And I was so struck by simply reframing, there's no technology involved, there's nothing really involved, but the skills and mindsets that you're learning along the way are powerful.
At this point in the talk, I have them now bring back their challenge or opportunity and reframe it using the following sentence template: who needs what, because why? I love this quick and practical application of the design thinking process, all of which can now be done with AI as your thought partner, because it immediately allows them to feel the power of reframing topics and again, makes it feel accessible to them because they've already seen it's something they can do.
You can see right away you've moved away, first of all, from this idea of challenge, right? Because challenge is too open-ended. And I feel like that's probably one of the worst things we experienced in the past 2 years was just people trying to solve problems with no solutions, no structures, no nothing. And they become these venting sessions. And we're just going in circles and circles and circles. And then by the end, you just have reached absolutely nowhere, which is one of the reasons people become so frustrated with new initiatives, technologies, or, replace that with anything else. But one of the most powerful things about giving people the time and space to first think about themselves, the challenges they have and the opportunities they want to pursue, and coming up with these statements is that then they go looking for the solutions. So today, as you are going through your different sessions, whether it's thinking about grading practices or immersive learning experiences or anything else you've learned, look at the solutions, the sessions, the ideas being shared through that lens. How is technology going to help you solve that problem? What other tools and resources are out there that can help you solve that problem? And in doing that work, people are now more motivated to go out and solve their own problems. So you're building capacity, which brings me full circle to sort of the main learning that I've had over the past decade, or the biggest takeaway I would say I've had from the past decade. And that is this idea that cultures of innovation begin not with devices, not with apps. They begin with empathy and people solving problems to create a better life for themselves and those around them. I was so struck by this idea and the impact that I saw it have on people, and especially in being able to accelerate innovation within organizations, that I went back to Design 39 campus and wanted to know, how did you do this? Because what really struck me is with so many change initiatives, we see them fizzle out over time. At Design 39, they were able to sustain it. And every single year, they were improving and improving and improving. But the one thing that as a teacher really, really, really resonated with me when I first came across Design 39 was one of the things that makes them really unique. And ultimately, this is the foundation of their success, is they have 1 hour of dedicated time every single morning to come together and collaborate. So at Design 39, they do not teach in silos the way most of us do. And I really, really wondered, why is teacher collaboration the exception and not the norm? And it's one of the biggest challenges we have ahead of us right now as we think about these new emerging technologies, is not just thinking about, oh, we have ChatGPT, so how do I now reframe my English essay? Or these little tiny changes that we think about so often. We need a restructuring of how we work and how we learn, not just within schools, but this is a challenge that organizations in every single industry and space are currently trying to work towards.
I took my research about how to use design thinking to challenge the status quo in schools and turned it into a documentary. It's called Designing Schools: The Future is a Place We Create. Next, I share the trailer with the group, and you can watch it as well at designingschools.org. You'll find a link to it in the show notes as well.
When I graduated as an educator in 2007, that was pretty much the only title I had for myself. And what I think is so cool about this documentary, or just the different things that we experience today with technology, is that the same people who I told you that I read about, that I learned about, who inspired my thinking, were all just a tweet or an email away. And that is such a testament to the world that we live in today and the opportunities that our kids have, not just our kids have, but that we ourselves have. When I graduated in 2007, I saw myself as just an educator. But over the last 10 years, I've done things like podcasting. I've created a documentary. I've, speaking, consulting. The world is open to us in so many ways when we begin with our strengths, our skills, and the problems it is that we would like to solve. We so often see the skills that we know are important. This is one of my favorites, the World Economic Forum. But again, when you look at design thinking and you look at the different things that happen, or you think about just some of the things that you did in just these few short activities, you can see the parallels between the skills our students need and these frameworks and methods that are available to us, as you saw from that one reading activity of being able to just slightly tweak things. I feel like in a couple years from now, we'll look back and remember 2023 as yet another inflection point with the acceleration of artificial intelligence. Anyone in here not played? Or how many of you in here have played with ChatGPT? Okay, awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of us. I sat down with it the other day and was really curious to take something that I already was familiar with, like this design thinking activity about Catch That Rat, and decided to say, hey, ChatGPT, I'm a teacher who just heard about design thinking. My kids are reading this book, Catch That Rat. Create a design thinking experience for me. And here it goes. And if you take this, and I'll share these slides with you, I'm going to give you a QR code in a moment. If you read the responses that it gives me, they match up almost word for word with the same ones that you'll see on the previous slide before. What previously would have taken you weeks, really, to do and put together by the time you learned about the process, you thought about the process, you went through the process, you got the confidence to maybe try it out, can now be done for you in seconds. I then decided to ask it, okay, that's great. Can you make the instructions for me too, please? I need to go ahead and give my students these instructions and tell them how to do it and how to use this. So go ahead, can you create some instructions for me? And if you actually are more specific and instead of instructions, say worksheets or however it is you want to structure something, it's so awesome. It will actually spit that out and give that to you as well. I then decided to say, hey, this is so awesome. I'd like to actually share this with my entire department. So can you please go ahead and draw up a lesson plan that's also aligned to standards, both for English, for whatever it is that you want to do, so that I can go ahead and I can share this out with everyone as well. So it goes ahead and says, certainly, here's a full-on lesson plan for how to take this book that you want to do and turn it into a design thinking experience. I said, that's fantastic. In our district, reading is a top priority. Literacy is a top priority. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that this is a tangible strategy and I want to share what I'm doing. So can you please go ahead and write up an email to my principal to tell them about the work that I'm doing so that I can send it out to them. So here it is, and it's now going to go ahead and write up a full email. And you could go on and on and on with this. You could say, hey, I want to write up an email to parents. I want to translate this into the 5 different languages that are here within my classroom. Can you translate this into Spanish, into Mandarin, into what other language it is that you want? And it will go ahead and it will create all of these for you. And while some people might sit here and think, well, this is cheating, and this is this, and this is that, the amount of time that this can open up to allow you to do the things that you first wrote down when you got here 45 minutes ago, when I asked you who it is you want to be, these are the kinds of tools that are going to allow us to accelerate back to doing what it is that not only we do best, but what it is that our students ask us for. Better relationships with our teachers, feeling more motivated to learn, being engaged in what it is that I'm doing. But one of the most resounding themes that you will see from students over and over and over again is I want to feel connected to my teacher, to my school, and to the people around me. And so one of the things that I sort of, leave you with today is how might you take these problems that you identified along with these dreams and aspirations of who you want to be, who I would probably argue you already are. You're just overwhelmed by so many other things, as we all are. But how would you take these things and how would you then think about leveraging the technology that you have now at your disposal to really think about the tasks that you shouldn't really be doing? And as great as that sound and as interesting as that sound, it's going to be one of the hardest things for us in the next coming years is to really think about, if I don't have to do all these mundane tasks and all this mundane work, what do I actually have the time and space to imagine myself now doing? And so I really encourage you to play with this tool, to try this tool, to experiment with it, because asking questions is hard. It's hard. It is really, truly the ultimate version of critical thinking. But once you do play with it, you do ask it the right questions and things like that, we're going to start to see this technology be integrated into just about everything, which means the possibilities for us in getting rid of some of these things that just really, really, really drag us down are absolutely exponential. And when you pair it with design thinking strategies that give you real structure to scaffold what it is that you're trying to solve for, the possibilities and opportunities in today's world are truly, truly endless.
While you were able to hear the narration of what I was doing with ChatGPT, watching it is truly remarkable. If you want to see it, you can find a link to it in the article where I walk you through the entire process in the show notes. If you enjoyed this format this week, I'd love to hear what resonated. Thank you again for listening. We're truly living in one of the most exciting times, and I'm going to close this episode with the same question I opened with. When thinking about your role, who do you want to be, and what do you want your legacy to be?
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.